Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander deck tech. Today we're going to be looking at our first Commander from Phyrexia All Will Be One, and there's only really one place for us to start, with Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. It is 4 and a white for a 4/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. It has Vigilance, and if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. It also has Permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. So, Elesh Norn is a lot of magic card. That first ability is a better Panharmonicon, as unlike Panharmonicon, it also triggers of any permanent entering the battlefield, not just creatures or artifacts. That means that it also doubles up the enter the battlefield effects of enchantments, meaning Oblivion Ring effects will exile 2 creatures until they are gone, as well as also working with effects that trigger off of lands entering the battlefield. So if your Field of the Dead is online, you'll make 2 zombie tokens instead of 1. That second ability is also a stronger Torpor Orb, as it means all of our opponents enter the battlefields on their permanents are turned off as well. So, how do we build this? In this video, we're primarily going to be focusing on that first ability, as it's a really strong way of proactively winning a game of Magic. To say this is going to be a blink deck is selling it short a little bit. We will have some blink cards to get additional enter the battlefield effects of creatures we're running, but as that first ability works with lands and enchantments as well, it's a really cool opportunity to do some new and interesting things. The best way to describe this deck is that it's an enter the battlefield matters deck. We care about all the cool abilities and triggers that we can double up whenever a permanent we control enters the battlefield. As for that bottom ability, it is obviously very strong, and while I don't think Elesh Norn is getting banned, it's this ability combined with the 5 mana 4/7 body that's really the cause of the conversation, as there is a fear that it can shut down a lot of cards. People like getting their value from creatures straight away. When we get to our win cons, we will go over a stack option that you can look at running if you are so inclined. One quick note about this video is that we will be going through all the individual sections that you need to make the deck yourself. We won't be giving a full deck list, rather a number of cards that you need in each section to make it work, and then a list of cards for you to pick from. Any card we mention will be down in the description below. Starting off with the deck proper, and firstly we are going to go over those blink effects. These are here to let us get even more enter the battlefield effects off of our creatures, which will then get doubled up by Elesh Norn. First up we have Teleportation Circle and Conjurer's Closet. These are great as they give us repeatable ways of blinking something turn after turn. In a similar way, we also have Distinguished Conjurer, which while we do have to pay 5 to blink something, also comes with the added benefit of gaining some life, which because it triggers when things enter the battlefield, will get doubled up by Elesh Norn. Next up we have some creatures that can blink other creatures, with things like Felidar Guardian and Restoration Angel. As the blink with these isn't enter the battlefield effect, it will also get doubled up with Elesh Norn as well, so you can really start going to town with your whole board. And then we have cards like Eerie Interlude, Lae'zel's Acrobatics and Semester's End. While unfortunately these are only one-time effects, they do let us blink our whole board at instant speed and bring them back at the next end step. Blinking our whole board just to value up some more into the battlefield effects is fantastic, but the added protection it can give us by allowing us to dodge a board wipe or some targeted removal is fantastic. Then next up we have Preston the Vanisher, and while this doesn't directly blink a creature, it kind of does the job of one. When we do blink or reanimate a creature, Preston gives us a token copy of it, basically doubling up its enter the battlefield effect, ready for it to be doubled up again by Elesh Norn. And then obviously, if we're talking about doubling up some enter the battlefield effects, we can't leave home without a Panharmonicon. It's always great to have some redundancy for your commander, and Panharmonicon is the best option. Just imagine having them both in play. Time to move on to some card draw. In this kind of deck, I'd be looking for between 8 to 10 bits here. First up, we have Wedding Ring, which lets us draw a card whenever an opponent who has a wedding ring draws a card. The ability to give an opponent a token copy of it is an enter the battlefield effect, so we'll get doubled up with Elesh Norn, meaning we'll be drawing cards whenever 2 of our opponents do so. Next up we have the bulk of our card draw, and it comes in the form of creatures that draw a card when they enter the battlefield. These all drawing 2 cards with Elesh Norn out is obviously fantastic, and get even better with some of the blink effects that we've already gone over. What's really nice about these as well is that they're all pretty cheap, so can go in any budget of deck. Then we have some white cards that give you the initiative. Annoyingly more difficult to come across nowadays, but fantastic in any mono white deck, and especially one like this that can double up their enter the battlefield effect. Moving over to our ramp section, and like our card draw we're looking at running between 8 to 10 bits here. Starting off we're looking at some spells that work with Elesh Norn. Deep Known Terramancer will let us go and get 2 planes whenever our opponents put a land onto the battlefield without it being played, so this works with things like fetch lands, rampant growth effects and the like. Remember, Elesh Norn doesn't care what is causing the permanent to trigger, it doesn't have to be our own things, just as long as the permanent that is being triggered is ours, then it all works. Then we have some creatures that go and get lands out of our deck when they come into play. Knight of the White Orchid, Loyal Warhound, Kor Cartographer and Solemn Simulacrum are good in any white deck, but in this they're obviously better as they'll be doubled up by our commander, for a ramp package a green player can only dream of. Then we have Archaeomancer's map. With Elesh Norn out, this gets 4 planes and puts them into our hand, and then sits there, and then if a player has more lands than us and they play one, we'll get to put 2 lands into play. It's like burgeoning on steroids. Then to round us off, we have our mana rocks. These don't need to synergize with Elesh Norn to get into the deck. They just help us play it and our other spells early so we can get the ball rolling. Time now to move over to our interaction section. I'd personally recommend running slightly more than normal here, as there are just so many good options, it'd be a shame to not jam them in. First up, we have some Oblivion Ring effects. These are generally pretty solid bits of removal, but not as popular in Commander because they can always be answered. What takes them up a level in this deck is that with Elesh Norn, they will take out 2 of our opponent's things when they enter, which skyrockets them in value. Also, as Elesh Norn turns off our opponent's end of the battlefield effects, cards like Reclamation Sage no longer answer them. We have a card like On Thin Ice, which does mean we have to run some snow planes, but when we get to our win con section, you'll see why we actually want to be running a couple anyway. You have Grasp of Fate, which is phenomenal, as it takes 2 non-land permanents for each opponent. Touch the Spirit Realm can also be a blink spell whenever we need it to be, and then Oblivion Ring is just the OG. There's plenty more options out there, so run the ones that suit your budget. After that, we have some creatures that exile things when they come into play. Remember, these also double up. Skycave Apparition is pretty much another Oblivion Ring, but they'll only get a token back, not the creatures that you've exiled with it. Then Solitude and Duplicant can just straight exile 2 things each when they come in. For some more specific interaction, Lauren of the Third Path can take out any troublesome artifacts or enchantments our opponents might be running. And then for some more hateful style effects, yes, it is 9 mana, but Portal to Phyrexia making all opponents sacrifice 6 creatures should be game ending. And then, because sometimes you just need a hard reset, we have some board wipes. Wrath of God and Wings of Abandon are pretty standard fare, but in this mono white deck, Mass Calcify might be worth the additional mana to keep our board safe. Next up, we have a little bit of protection, and I'm pretty sure we'll need some just because Elesh Norn is going to paint a pretty sizable target on its back. That means we're starting off unsurprisingly with Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, pretty much essential as a way of keeping Elesh Norn around. Then we have Sajiri Shelter, free to run as it can be played as a land that can importantly protect our commander. For some more spenny options, we have Flawless Maneuver and Teferi's Protection. Great if you have them, but not essential if you're putting the deck together on more of a budget. Next up is some Recursion. This isn't essential, but I always like running a couple of bits in case any of our opponents are a bit spiteful to our board. We're primarily looking at big effects we can double up with Elesh Norn, and that means cards like Karmic Guide and Sun Titan. Perfect to bring back a key piece, some interaction, or even just a way of drawing us some cards. Then we move over to some win conditions. This will be split into 2 sections, reasons why we'll get onto in a little bit. First up, we're going to look at some proactive ways of winning a game. We're going to start first with some token makers. First, we have ones that care about our devotion to white with Reverent Hoplite and Evangel of Heliod. In this deck, with all the white creatures and the white Oblivion Ring effects that'll be sitting around on the board, this will be really easy to get nice and high. Combine that with the doubling effects of Elesh Norn and we'll have a massive board state in no time. On top of those, we also have landfall effects that make tokens. Again, with these being doubled by Elesh Norn will be absolutely nuts. Cards like Emeria Angel, Felidar Retreat and Retreat to Emeria will be perfect at giving us that game-winning board state. To help out with that, we have Field of the Dead. And then you also have Weathered Wayfarer and Expedition Map of ways to go and get it. We are a mono white deck, but we can pack the deck full of utility lands and a couple of basic snow planes to make it easier to get to that 7 different name lands we need to get this going. When it is, and we're making 2 zombies for every land we play, it'll get out of hand really quickly. With all those tokens, there's a few ways we can push them over the top. Firstly, we have Cathar's Crusade, which is good in most white decks, but again, is even better when we're doubling the amount of tokens that go onto everything. Another way of winning the game with those tokens is by milling out our opponents with something like Altar of the Brood. Honestly, this will add up quicker than you think. Then we also have Legion Loyalty, which gives all of our creatures Myriad. Just think of what this could do with all the Enter the Battlefield effects, all the tokens, everything that this deck is already doing. If I'm honest, the biggest issue will be tracking all of the value that you have accumulated. And then we have an alternate win condition with Halo Fountain. We could very easily get to 15 creatures on the board with our token makers out, and then just play 5 white and bingo, game over. Hello, I don't normally butt in the middle of videos once they're up and running, but for this bit I thought it was best. There is another way that you can take the win condition for this deck, but it is a little bit more miserable. I'm personally not a massive fan of win conditions that are make everyone at the table hate you, but it is one of the reasons why people are excited with Elesh Norn, so we are going to start talking about the STAX section that you can use to win games. These you can use to lock down everything else your opponents are doing while you grind ahead in value. This ties in quite strongly to Elesh Norn's bottom ability of stopping everyone else's Enter the Battlefield effects. Again, personally, I think white has more than enough pieces nowadays to proactively go ahead and win the game. But these kind of control stack pieces are a large part of white's colour identity, so it is worth talking about. If you're not a fan of stacks and locking your opponents out of the game, you can skip this section, don't worry. A stacks package is a very all-in section. If you want to run this, you're going to have to cut some of the other win conditions and some of the other blink cards. What we're looking for is to stop our opponents from actually playing magic while we still get to. Nothing signifies this in Commander better than Dranith Magistrate. Stopping your opponents casting spells from anywhere other than their hands importantly stops your opponents from casting their commanders. Then we have cards that limit the amount of spells that people can cast a turn, with Deafening Silence, Ether Swarm Canonist, and Rule of Law. Traditionally, mono white decks have a hard time keeping up when doing things like double spelling, compared to the other colours anyway, and these cards help level that playing field. The fact we get double value off of all of our spells with Elesh Norn is what will break the symmetry and will pull us ahead. You then have cards that slow your opponent's turns, basically by making their creatures and lands come into play tapped, with things like Authority of the Consuls, Blind Obedience, and Thalia Heretic Cathar. This further widens the gap between them and us, as all of their things have to take a turn off before they can use them, allowing us to push to winning the game while they're still trying to catch up. You then have Archon of Emeria, which does a little bit of both of those. Then we have Spirit of the Labyrinth, which limits the amount of cards that everyone can draw a turn, stopping those pesky blue players from getting any kind of card advantage. And then we have cards that make non-creature spells cost a little bit more. Like with the rest of this package, this will hurt everyone else more than it does us, as we still get the value of our creatures coming into play, unlike our opponents. And then finally for this package, please, for the love of God, run an actual win condition. Something like Heliod, Sun Crowned, and Walking Ballista to ping everyone out. You can also run Enlightened Tutor as a way of searching them out. Everyone will thank you for this. To tie the whole package together, I'd probably run some more fast mana, some instant speed interaction, just so you have answers to those. Again, this type of build is not for everyone, so this package is entirely optional. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, and as we're a mono white deck, we have a good amount that we can look at. You also want to run more if you are running Field of the Dead. First up is our colourless lands. We have things like Command Beacon to help us replay Elesh Norn if it's ever hated out of the game. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is some good bonus recursion for our Oblivion Rings. We then have Reliquary Tower because card draw has got that good in white. You also have Scavenger Grounds as a great way of nerfing any graveyard decks, and then War Room is some nice bonus card draw. For some white cards, we have Castle Ardenvale as a solid way of making some tokens. Aganjo Castle is a nice bonus way of protecting Elesh Norn, and Aganjo Seat of the Empire is some nice bonus removal. You then have Windbrisk Heights as some additional card advantage. If you are running Field of the Dead, then I'd also look to run Ancient Den as a land with a different name that taps for white. Then you have Idyllic Grange and Mistvale Plains, which you can tutor up for with some of our land effects that don't specify basic plains. And then along with these, a handful of snow-covered plains. Then we're going to finish off the deck with some cycling lands just to help smooth out our draws. So with all that said, thank you very much for watching. Do let me know down in the comments if there's any other commanders from Phyrexia or Would Be One that you would like to see a deck tech on, and I'll check them out. But until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.